Greetings and welcome. Today is exciting. It is finally September, which means fall painting start now. In fact, if you look out my window, I'll take you with me. You can actually see some orange in the trees. Right here. I can't wait. So with that in mind and sight, today we're going to be painting this. This is my first fall painting of the year. Fall paintings are always my favorite of the year. I love any excuse to throw orange like this into a painting, and you're going to get a whole month of it. Actually 2 months. You're going to get a whole 2 months of it. Here's actually a sneak peek at another new hour-long lesson coming very soon to Patreon. And a cut up coming to YouTube. Now, as per usual, I have to say it, the digital sketch for this is up on Patreon to help you with the drawing process. It comes with the grid, it's so you can print it out, you can trace, you can just make it a really easy process. But also, the full hour-long version of this, I think it's actually 2.5 hours. It's quite long because it's a real introductory to all of the new fall colors and all of the new blending we're doing. But I thought it would be worth it to take the time and do as good of a job as we can. So if you're interested in the 2-hour version of this, in the digital sketch, or in any of the other 36 other hour-long lessons currently up on Patreon, you can go check those out over there as well. New fall reference photos coming in the next couple of days as well. Also, I know this intro is getting long. We'll get to the lesson in just a second, but 25% off ebooks for 2 more weeks. That's it, and then they go back to regular price. You can get acrylics for beginners right now. It teaches you all of the basics, everything you need to know about acrylic painting. And you can get both painting prompts right now, which is essentially 21 gridded digital sketches ready for you to print out on days where you want to create something, you want to make something, but the ideas aren't coming, you don't have that creative flow, but you know you want to work and become a better painter. These are for those days. Also again, I know I've been pushing the book sale and the Patreon a lot lately, but all of the money that you spend on the book sale and all of the money that you support us on Patreon with and get these lessons with, it means a lot right now. Our dog Luna, she had surgery on her knee about 2.5 months ago, and it fixed her knee, and now she went from not being able to walk on it at all to being fantastic on it. And it was wonderful and it was worth it. But it also had a $7,000 price tag, which is a lot of money. And all of the help that you are giving us now through the book sale, through supporting us on Patreon, it means the world, and it helps immensely. So truly thank you for that. I'm not going to bother you anymore with this incredibly long intro. Let's get into the hour-long lesson cut-up thing. I'm going to begin with a large square-headed brush. Dip the tip of it in some water to ensure that it's nice and damp. That way I get to extend the wet life of my paint and drag it a little bit farther. Then I'm going to grab a good amount of titanium white, a little bit of primary blue, mix those two together, and a hint of Mars black. Not much at all though. Now once I have this fairly bright, nice blue here, I'm going to begin applying it to the base of my sky in horizontal strokes. I'm going to begin this painting in the back on the sky, that way we layer everything else on top of it and we don't have to worry about painting around intricate subjects in the foreground. Now I applied my lightest layer of blue right there. We're going to add a mid-tone right above it, so I'm going to take some additional primary blue, hint of that Mars black, mix that in there, and as we get higher in the sky it's going to get slightly darker and darker. So here you can see a good transition, and I'm trying to make it darker progressively. That way it looks like the light is coming from right behind the clouds here, and then as we get up we start to lose that light. We get farther and farther away. This will give us some depth in the painting and make sure we have a nice little gradient. Now I'm going to switch over to a medium-sized square-headed brush. Dip the tip of that in some water, make sure it's nice and damp, grab some titanium white, a hint of Mars black, and a hint of primary blue. With this, we're going to be creating some clouds, and I've drawn those in, and I can still kind of see the outline, so I'm just going to work within that right now. But as you can see, it's meant to be a gray cloud, but I do have hints of blue mixed in there as well, because we're going to get a lot of reflected light from that sky. The paint isn't as thick as the sky yet, and I think that's actually quite noticeable, but that's okay. We're going to quickly fix that by just throwing in some more titanium white, some more of our Mars black, get a nice thick application, and throw that on there. And now that we've filled in the larger majority of our cloud, we're going to switch to a smaller round-headed brush. This is much better for detail work, and it also has a bit of a feathered edge. So when you make an application, it doesn't have a sharp point to it, but one that kind of has a gradient on all edges. So it gives you a much softer looking application. So for our clouds, we want a softer application. It's much more soft. So I'm going to take my smaller round-headed brush. I'm going to take some of this titanium white here. Going to move it down on my palette, grab a hint of our Mars black. We're mixing up a gray. We're grabbing a hint of our blue. We want it to be nice and cool. And now we can go along the edges of our cloud here and give it a nice highlight. I'm moving my brush in a little bit of a circular shape, and I'm blending the highlights down in a circular motion. It's a rainy day in real life, and Howie's feeling a little nappy. Can you hear him purr? It's adorable. Now that our painting's had a little bit of time to dry, we can jump back into it, and this time I have 3 new colors on my palette. I have a primary yellow, primary red, and a burnt umber. Now with these, I'm going to take my brush, make sure it's nice and damp, still using the medium-sized square-headed brush. I'm going to grab a lot of primary yellow, going to grab a hint of primary red. Primary red's a much more dominant color, and if you mix them about evenly, then you're not going to get an orange, you're actually going to get just more of a red. So we need to be very careful with the amount of red we add in here. We need more thickening pigment. So I'm going to grab some titanium white, which is a very thick pigment, and I'm going to grab some Mars black, just a hint. Now Mars black can be very tricky when we're working with oranges because when it mixes with yellow, it makes more of an olive green. So we need to make sure we have a fair amount of red in there when we begin mixing our Mars black. Here we'll move a little bit of that pigment over. I'll grab some burnt umber. So you can see, this is going to darken the pigment. It's going to give it more of an earthy tone. Grab some more red. Oh, that's nice. It's a beautiful autumn color. And it's thick because we have the titanium white and our Mars black. So I'm going to take this new pigment, I'm going to throw it into the background here. Going to switch over to the older square-headed brush. This is the one with the bristles that leaf off in varying directions. You can make one of these yourself by just taking a regular flat square-headed brush and peeling back the bristles until it looks disheveled. So here we'll grab that same pigment we were just working with, and now I'll add the texture to the tops of the trees. This is why I wasn't worrying about the initial application, because I knew we'd come in just a second and add all of this detail, just like that. We're going to begin working on the highlights in this. Now I have this really beautiful highlight color there, and I think I'll continue playing with it. So I'm going to thicken it a little bit because now we're working on a darker base layer, and when you try to add a light layer on top of a dark layer, generally you need to do a fair bit of layering because it is semi-transparent. So here I'm just mixing up a nice thick orange, going back and forth, adding more red and yellow until I get something nice. Now I'm going to apply this to the tops of the trees, very subtly. Don't want too much of it. And then work it down in the same way we worked the darker pigment up. Now I'm going to switch over to my medium-sized square-headed brush, dip the tip of that in some water, grab a good amount of our primary yellow, a little bit of our primary blue, mix up a nice lush green here, grab a hint of Mars black, and a hint of titanium white. Those are to thicken it up and desaturate it a little bit. We're currently creating the color for our grass in the background, and we're continuing to just layer the background to the foreground. So here, you can see we have a nice thick application. You can't see the canvas through any of this, except maybe where I lift my brush. I'm just going to go over the hill in the background. Now, I'm going to switch over to my smaller square-headed brush, and we're going to begin working on this path here. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water, yet again to extend the wet life of my paint and allow me to drag it farther. Now I'm going to grab some burnt umber, a little bit of Mars black, and a little bit of titanium white. This is to thicken the pigment, but yet again, it's also to desaturate it. We're working in the background of the painting, and we don't want our pigments to be too saturated. I'm going to start my pathway with a dark base layer, and then we can build on top of it. Now we're going to build some detail in this area. I'm going to switch over to my smaller square-headed brush to do so. I'm going to dip the tip of that in some water, going to grab some titanium white, some burnt umber, mix those two up together, make a fair amount. And then I'm going to create some little mounds of dirt that are popping up here. I want them to be different shapes and sizes. And then once I start to run out of paint on my brush, I'm going to blend the bottom of these mounds downwards. I'm going to keep the tops of them nice and sharp. So in the meantime, I'm going to work on the next part of the background, which is the foliage and greenery here in the foreground. Now, because we're working in the foreground, we want everything to be more stark. We want more bright colors, we want more dark, and we want them to mix together. So I'm going to start here by mixing up a green with some Mars black. We're going to mix a very dark green first, then we're going to add a mid-tone on top of it, then we're going to add a highlight, and that's how we're going to achieve our depth. But here I'm essentially just using Mars black and our primary yellow. Keeping it easy. And I'm going to tap on the bushes that we have in the background. Just like so. Now that our bushes and grass are fairly dry, I'm going to take my older square-headed brush, going to grab some of our primary yellow, a little bit of primary blue, a little bit of Mars black, make sure that it's not too lush. I want an equal combination of the Mars black and the primary blue, that way the color is fairly neutral. It isn't too yellow, but it isn't too blue. And then once I get something that's nice balance, I'm going to add some titanium white to thicken it. I'm going to add some primary yellow to give it some saturation. And I'm going to evaluate how close it is with this. And I like it a lot. I think it'll be a nice little highlight to this pigment. So now I'm going to go on top of it and just tap on this good little mid-tone here. From there, I'm going to switch to my medium-sized square-headed brush, grab some of our water here, and then I'm going to move to my burnt umber, some Mars black, good amount of Mars black, and mix those two together to make a nice dark pigment. I'm going to grab a tiny bit of titanium white to thicken it up. It's going to make it a bit more gray. So I'm going to grab a little bit more black, make it stark again. And then I'm just going to work from the edges of the tree that I have in here and paint it in. And now we have the base layer for that one. Looks quite nice. We still need to add in our midtones and our highlights. And we can do that by just taking some more of that burnt umber, taking a bit of titanium white to thicken it up, a little bit of Mars black, not that much because we want this to be a mid-tone. Then on the edge of this tree with a bit of a tapping motion, I'm going to work down the side of it that's facing the light. And then as you move backwards in the painting, we get farther and farther away from where that light will hit. So I'm just continuing that tapping motion and allowing that paint to dissipate as you move farther back. Now we're going to move on to these trees, and this tree right here is behind this tree, which means we need to start with it. Now I've decided that I want this to be a bit of a darker red, so I'm going to take my older square-headed brush. I'm going to take some of our primary red here. I'm going to take a little bit of burnt umber to make it nice and earthy. I'm going to grab a hint of Mars Black here, not too much, and make a nice dark red pigment. It's going to be fairly thick, which means we won't have to do too much layering. But this is essentially going to be the darker base layer for our tree. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take the older square-headed brush, we're going to take some of our primary red, we're going to take a hint of our titanium white to thicken it, we're going to take a little bit of that primary yellow to mix up a nice orangey color, a real fall. Then I'm going to apply it to the edges of this tree, as you can see, and work my way inwards via the series of tapping motions. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some primary yellow, some primary red, mix those together, make a nice orange pigment. And this is going to be extremely thin. So I'm going to add some primary red, and then I'm going to add some burnt umber. Make it a little bit more earthy, give it another color, make it a little bit more thick, and we're just going to build the base layer of our orange here. So here I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush, I'm going to grab some primary blue, grab a little bit of Mars Black, a little bit of titanium white, mix up a nice grayish blue, something similar to what we have more in the top of the sky. And then we're going to incorporate some puddles down here. We've given this top area some good time to dry, and I think we can come back into it. So I'm going to take my older square-headed brush, grab some of our primary yellow, a little bit of primary red, mix those together to make a nice orange. We'll make it leaning on the yellow side, and then I'll grab a hint of titanium white, really brighten that up. It's like a baby pumpkin color. Now, going to tap it along the edges of these trees and work it in through a series of tapping motions as well. Now we have all of these beautiful leaves up top for this fall scene, but it's fall, they need to be falling. So we need to add those in as well. I'm going to switch to another brush. I'm going to take my smaller round-headed brush here, dip it in water. I'm going to take some of our primary yellow, hint of our primary red, not much at all, and some titanium white. Make it nice and thick. Then I'm just going to go to the bottom here and draw in a bunch of these nice little yellow orange leaves. They can be overlapping one another. Here we're going to put a couple on this bench. They're going to be a lot down here by the ground. And they'll build up in clusters as well, so you don't need to make them all individually spaced. They can connect, like there I have 5 or 6. And because we're doing all of our leaves with an individual tap down here, we can also do some up here in the highlights. It'll give it that same look and texture, and it'll make them look a lot closer to us. It'll make it much more cohesive. Now this last step that I'm going to do here is honestly a little bit experimental. I'm going to take this older square-headed brush here. I'm going to head over to my palette, grab some primary yellow, some primary red, mix up a really nice orange color, grab a hint of titanium white to thicken it. I'm going to give it a little bit more saturation back, red and orange. And I'm going to tap this down into our leaves. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.